Welcome, everyone. It is such a pleasure to have you all join us for this inaugural event, the launch of the LGBTQ Plus Index. It's a virtual event, as you can see, but we are so pleased that you could join. My name is Una Osili, and I am the Associate Dean for Research and International Programs at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. I'd like to invite you, of course, since you're joining us today, to take a moment and introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you're joining from. We'd love to hear where you're currently located and what organization you are with or what organization you're representing today. And if you're just representing yourself, that's fine as well. As you send in your name, your introduction via the chat forum, I'd like to provide a quick overview of our time together this afternoon or this morning, depending on where you're joining from. I'm going to start today by introducing our LGBTQ Index and turning it over to my wonderful colleagues, and in particular, my colleague Tessa, who will be sharing a high-level overview of the research findings. And next, I'm so pleased that we have a very esteemed group of panelists today who will share their time, their expertise, and their insights with us today. And we'll also have the opportunity for all of you to send in your questions, your comments. I see lots of people joining, so a very active group. Please send in your comments throughout the webinar, but we will have some time at the end for a question and answer period. So lots ahead today. Let me just start by saying that we here at the Lilly Family School are truly excited to share these findings. The LGBTQ Plus Index is the very first new index created as part of a new initiative here at the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy. This project, the Equitable Giving Lab, was made possible by generous support from Google.org. And we are so grateful to the Google team and Google.org in particular for their vision and their support throughout this project. The Equitable Giving Lab brings a lens of equity to philanthropic work across the country by measuring charitable giving to historically under-resourced and underserved communities. In addition to the LGBTQ Plus Index, we also already have the Giving to Women's and Girls Causes, the Women's and Girls Index, which has been created annually and updated by the Women's Philanthropy Institute here at the Lilly Family School. And for those of you who are very interested in this work, stay tuned. We will be launching another index to join these two, the BIPOC and military veterans indices. So going back to our focus for today, the LGBTQ Plus Index provides for the first time a baseline measure of total charitable giving to US-based nonprofits primarily serving the LGBTQ Plus community and examines how giving to these organizations has changed in recent years. It also provides insights into other characteristics of LGBTQ Plus nonprofits, such as their size, their focus, their geographic distribution. And that's why I've asked some of you to share where you're joining us from. This index is going to be updated annually, so we'll be tracking these trends into the future. And as the philanthropic environment, the social environment, and the political environment changes, we'll be able to better understand how giving to LGBTQ plus organizations continues to evolve. Now, I'm so pleased to turn the Zoom floor over to my wonderful colleague, Tessa Skidmore, who will share top-line findings from the research that we've all heard about. Tessa is the Assistant Director of Research for the Women's Philanthropy Institute at the Lilly Family School and serves alongside Dr. Anna Pruitt, who's also joining us today, as the co-lead for the LGBTQ Plus Index. So without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Tessa.
Thank you, Una, and thank you everyone for joining us today. So building off Una's introduction of the LGBTQ Plus Index, I wanted to share a few additional details before diving into the findings. The LGBTQ+ index is a list of 501c3 public charities, primarily dedicated to serving the LGBTQ+ community. The index includes US-based nonprofits that were active from 2012 to 2019, which is the most recent year that more than 99% of final IRS data on charitable organizations was available when work on the index began. And the analyses in the LGBTQ+ index report, whose findings I'll be sharing with you today, focus on the most recent 5-year period from 2015 to 2019. And the findings provide an overview of key characteristics of LGBTQ+ organizations, as Una mentioned, including the amount of total charitable giving they receive from individuals, foundations, and corporations. In terms of number, as shown on your screen, the index identifies 2,773 LGBTQ+ nonprofits, which comprise 0.2% of total charitable organizations in 2019. In terms of dollars, LGBTQ+ organizations received approximately $560 million in philanthropic support in 2019, which made up 0.13% of overall charitable giving that year. So to put this in context, philanthropic support for LGBTQ+ nonprofits makes up a fraction of that received by the traditional nonprofit subsectors as defined by Giving USA. For example, LGBTQ+ organizations received about 4% of the philanthropic support received by the smallest subsector, environment and animals, and about 0.4% of the philanthropic support received by the largest subsector, religion, in 2019. And although LGBTQ+ nonprofits receive a very small share of overall charitable giving, philanthropic support for these organizations grew at nearly double the rate of philanthropic support for non-LGBTQ+ organizations from 2015 to 2019. And charitable giving to nonprofits, more specifically, increased by 46% for those focused on the LGBTQ+ community, while charitable giving to non-LGBTQ+ nonprofits increased by about 25% during this time. And LGBTQ+ organizations saw especially strong year-over-year growth in philanthropic support in 2017 and 2018, increasing by around 12% in each of those years. Although our research is not able to make causal connections between changes in philanthropic support for LGBTQ+ nonprofits and specific events, other studies suggest that the growth in charitable giving to LGBTQ+ organizations during those years can be at least partially attributed to the 2016 presidential election. So shifting focus to the organizational level and looking at additional financial measures, LGBTQ+ nonprofits are substantially smaller than non-LGBTQ+ nonprofits in terms of average revenue, expenses, and assets. While LGBTQ+ organizations received about 72% of the average philanthropic support received by non-LGBTQ+ organizations in 2019, these organizations had about 1/3 the average revenue and expenses of non-LGBTQ+ organizations during that year. And LGBTQ+ organizations are particularly small in terms of assets, holding about 15% of the average assets held by non-LGBTQ+ organizations in 2019. And these findings are consistent with the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy's research on nonprofits dedicated to other under-resourced communities, including women and girls. We've found that these organizations tend to be more grassroots and rely heavily on volunteers. And because of this, their fundraising capacity and infrastructure is often more limited compared with that of larger organizations. So in terms of nonprofit subsector and geography, LGBTQ+ organizations are diverse and widespread. While these organizations appear in every subsector, public society benefit, health, and human services are especially prominent, with about 85% of LGBTQ+ organizations falling into those three subsectors. And although at least 4 LGBTQ+ nonprofits exist in every state, their representation varies across the US. California has the highest number of LGBTQ+ organizations by a large margin at 429, followed by New York at 243, Texas at 171, and Florida at 170. And the variety among these 4 states is notable because some are progressive states of historical and cultural significance to the LGBTQ+ community, while others are more conservative and rank low on measures of LGBTQ+ equality. In addition to nonprofit subsector, the LGBTQ+ Index report analyzes organization based on mission focus, which provides more detail on the types of nonprofits that serve the LGBTQ+ community. Civil rights and advocacy received by far the greatest share of philanthropic support for LGBTQ+ nonprofits in 2019, with about 53% of these organizations including civil rights and advocacy as part of their mission, followed by youth and HIV/AIDS, both at around 19%. And to the extent that information was available to make this distinction, the index only includes HIV/AIDS organizations that specifically focus on serving the LGBTQ+ community. While philanthropic support for LGBTQ+ organizations increased across the board from 2015 to 2019, certain mission-focused categories did see especially strong growth. And this includes transgender-specific organizations, which saw a nearly 200% increase in charitable giving during this period, and a more than 50% increase in 2019 alone. And the rise in giving to transgender organizations from 2015 to 2019 is likely a response to a combination of political and social factors. Numerous anti-transgender policies were introduced or enacted at the national, state, and local levels from 2015 to 2019. And there was also a general cultural shift towards greater awareness of diverse gender identities and increased representation of individuals with these identities in television and film during this period. So I want to close by emphasizing that the LGBTQ+ index includes numerous resources that scholars, donors, funders, and nonprofit leaders can use to research and support LGBTQ+ organizations. Fundraisers and leaders of LGBTQ+ nonprofits can use the findings in the report to better understand how their organizations compare with others in this space and to help build the case for supporting their organizations. Donors and funders can use the research to identify gaps in existing resources and to tailor their giving based on the distinct characteristics of LGBTQ+ nonprofits. And both scholars and practitioners can access the LGBTQ+ index data for free at www.lgbtqindex.org. This website allows visitors to download the full list of LGBTQ+ index organizations, as well as search for organizations based on criteria like keyword, focus area, and geographic location. Along with the report, infographic, and case studies, available at equitablegivinglab.org/LGBTQ Index. These tools can equip individuals and organizations with a starting point for making data-informed decisions that help address equity issues in philanthropy. So I will now turn it back over to Una to introduce our panelists and to moderate our discussion today.
Well, thank you so much, Tessa. It has been just, I'd say, inspiring to watch this project come to life in such a short amount of time. In addition to thanking our funders once again, google.org, I also want to take this opportunity to thank our advisory council members who worked alongside us on this project. I think some of them have joined us. I saw Dr. Elizabeth Dale earlier, so just want to acknowledge all the excellent work that went into this project. And thank you to Tessa, Dr. Anna Pruitt, Jackie Ackerman, John Bergdahl, and so many others who worked tirelessly in a very short amount of time to bring this project to all of you. So thank you again, and thank you, Tessa. I encourage all of you who've joined us today to send your questions on the research findings via either the Q&A button or the chat function. We will have some time, as I mentioned, at the end for the Q&A period. And the research team can also follow up with you after this event. So send those questions throughout this whole discussion. And now I am truly excited to welcome our panelists to share their insights, their reactions, and their thoughts around the research and also their experiences as funders and leaders in the LGBTQ plus landscape, and specifically from the organizations that they represent. So let me start by introducing Kenya Anderson, who is our own local leader here in Indiana. She is the Director of Young Adult Services at Indiana Youth Group right here in Indianapolis. And I'm also so pleased to welcome Roger Doughty, who serves as president of the Horizons Foundation. He's joining us all the way from California, and you've already heard that California has one of the most interesting landscapes right now, the largest number of organizations, but also tremendous diversity in those organizations. And then I also want to mention Adrian Lawyer, who has joined us all the way from New Mexico. Welcome, Adrian. He's the co-founder and director of education at the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico in Albuquerque. Welcome. So let me just ask the panelists to join us formally and introduce how their organization serves the LGBTQ plus community, and specifically what they're seeing right now from their own leadership roles. So let's start with Kenya.
Hello, my name is Kenya Anderson. I am the director for Indiana Youth Group, or IYG as it's called here in the city, and we provide services for 18 to 24-year-olds. We provide services in our center for basic needs. So they come in and get clothing, they come in and get food in our food pantry. We have gender affirming care products for our clients as well, educational services, employment assistance, and those are all things that are available within our center. And also in our young adult program, we have rapid rehousing, and that houses young adults 18 to 24 who have been chronically homeless. And they're in our program for up to 3 years. And during that time, we are pairing them up with resources to help them be independent. So that's a lot of employment assistance, continuing education, making sure they're insured and they have proper health care, the things that they need, gender affirming care as well. We work with several organizations within the community to provide those services for them, and mental health services as well is a very important component of our program. And those are the things that we provide. Our community center also helps just have a place to come and hang out and be themselves, a place that they are safe and protected, and they don't have to deal with some of the hateful and angry attitudes that are out right now. They can just come and be safe and be affirmed, and it is for those in the LGBTQ community and allies as well.
Thank you, Kenya, and thanks for all your hard work. We also want to turn it over to Roger to share his own perspective coming in from California. So we've basically crossed the country at this point, thanks to Zoom.
Okay, already a rookie mistake, failing to unmute myself. My apologies. Thank you, Una. I'm Roger with Horizons Foundation. I use he, him pronouns. Horizons Foundation is an LGBTQ community foundation. We're based in San Francisco, and we serve the Bay Area, but also we do some work nationally and a little bit globally as well. We serve the community in three main ways. The first is as a grant maker, as you might expect. And we especially focus on smaller and more grassroots organizations. The second area of work is to increase the financial resources that are available for LGBTQ organizations across the spectrum. And we do that both by advocating with foundations for greater funding, but also within the community itself, so that there are more LGBTQ folks who give to LGBTQ causes. And then lastly, we are working to create a permanent endowment for the community. And while endowment has become a little bit of an outward in some philanthropic circles, for this community, which has never ever had the kind of resources that it can draw on, it's an imperative. And we have an incredible opportunity to do so, especially through legacy giving. And so that's a little bit about Horizons.
Okay, and let's come to New Mexico. Adrian, very excited to hear about your work as well. So you have the floor.
Fantastic. Yeah, I helped to start our center, the Transgender Resource Center of New Mexico, back in 2007. In that time, we've grown to a really sizable statewide organization, and we do our work for trans and non-binary people through a really intentional combination of direct services, advocacy, and education. So I'm the director of education. That's my main area. I do trainings all over the state, actually all over the country. Our flagship training is called Transgender Cultural Fluency, and we'll just bring people up to a baseline of understanding about terminology, history, data, the current political landscape. And we do that training over Zoom even, so we can do it for any group of 5 or more people. We have other curricula we offer as education, and I'm hoping to turn my attention this year to bring in more education to our trans communities here. We've spent these 15 years educating cisgender folks here in New Mexico and are going to continue to do that, but I'm excited to think about what our community might also benefit from. Advocacy in the nonprofit world, of course, means policy and legislative work. We do all of that. We've worked very closely with our friends at Equality New Mexico to change 2 big laws here, one that governs how you change your gender on your birth certificate, and one that governs name change process here. And that'll just be going into effect in the next couple of weeks. We've gotten rid of what they call the publication requirement to change your name. So that's very exciting. It'll bring a lot more safety to folks here. Direct services, I could spend the rest of our time talking about what we do. So just super briefly, statewide, we provide help with emergency financial assistance, peer support, including 9 different support groups, information and referrals, including a provider directory on our website. We do a statewide outreach program for trans and non-binary people who are incarcerated in state prisons, but also in county jails. We have a drop-in center here in Albuquerque. It's one of the only things that's really restricted to the metro area. Anybody's welcome at our drop-in center, but it really is built around the needs of unsheltered folks. So we have a shower there. We have washers and dryers. We serve 25 to 30 prepared meals every shift that we're open. We serve as a permanent mailing address for many of our folks there. We have non-medical case management. We have an in-house therapist now, finally. We have computer access, places to rest, on and on and on. Lots of partner orgs that come in and help. And the final thing I want to say is that just within the last month, we finally purchased a first home to start a transitional living program that we've dreamed of for 15 years here. So we think we'll be opening our house with a first cohort before the end of the year. Sorry for taking so much time.
Well, this is amazing. I was just going to say, just in your opening remarks, all 3 panelists have energized and brought life to the data that we just shared, that Tessa just shared. So I'd like to ask the panelists, as you heard the results today, read the report, looked at the data, what stood out to you? Your organization span everything from civil rights and advocacy, direct services, funding, and so many other domains. Is there anything you found particularly noteworthy? Is there anything you found surprising? And what are your key takeaways? Let's start with Roger.
Okay, hopefully I'm unmuted this time. And good. So a few things that stood out. I mean, it's a treasure trove of information. And thank you to the whole team over there for pulling all of this together. So just three things that stood out to me. One of them is simply the indicators of organizational strength and size. We work with grassroots organizations all the time. This doesn't come as a great surprise. But to see the numbers for the relatively small asset base and other capacity measures that LGBTQ organizations have, documented on a national level, just like a lot of other things that you might, already believe that are the case, but to see them documented in such detail, just underscores the profound challenge that the great majority of LGBTQ organizations have always faced. And that no matter how much we may be in the news for reasons good or not so good, that we still face. So that would be one. The second is the enormous portion of the philanthropic support that goes to rights and advocacy. And that is absolutely essential. We fund advocacy and rights work here, and of course we support it, and it has to be done nationally, locally, state levels, at the United Nations, I mean, everywhere. But every one of those dollars, which is half of the dollars or something like that, that go to that are dollars that cannot be used for other things. They can't be used for programs like what Kenya described or what Adrian described. They cannot be used for arts. They cannot be used for culture. They cannot be used for elders programs. They cannot be used for all of these other things. And so in a way, there is, I would call it, almost, I'm putting this in air quotes, a burden that the fact that LGBTQ rights are so insecure in so many parts of the country that we have to channel an enormous portion of our dollars, especially individual giving dollars, towards just our basic rights. And then the last thing is that it appears, I mean, there are a lot of different percentages and numbers in here, but it appears that there may actually be a decline in the portion of total foundation support that is going to support LGBTQ causes. Over this period, because we see 63.4% or whatever it is for the increase, and that's all great. We always like to see increases, but with some help from folks there at the school, it seems as though while there was an increase of 63.4% in foundation support from 2011 to 2020, the increase in foundation support across the foundation sector was actually more than 100%. So relatively speaking, we're actually further behind than we were in 2011. LGBTQ folks are actually getting a smaller portion of the total pie. And so notwithstanding, what folks may think and all that, those are the numbers. And that's a pretty stark reality.
Fantastic. So you are lifting up both the points, sort of a call to action around funding, but also how the data insights can really inform those working in the sector, both on the funding side and the program side. Okay, well, that's a nice segue to Adrian. Adrian, you mentioned the work that you're doing both on the program side and the advocacy side. So you've kind of lifted up those two areas. What aspects of the data really stood out to you, and what was really surprising? What didn't you know that this helped you perhaps gain insights from?
I don't know if I was surprised, but I think it really stood out to me, the list of the issues that seem to be affecting the funding landscape, those sort of negative landmarks and milestones that we're meeting that are kind of driving some of this increase, especially into the trans sector, I think. And I worry about that kind of funding. I'm concerned when we're responding to a presidential election or these legislative campaigns or whatever it may be, because we saw what happens when the funding is generated from those kinds of tragedies or dire needs. Many of the state equality orgs dissolved in the wake of the Supreme Court marriage decision because every single thing had been focused on marriage equality. And if we take in money to do these things, I think Roger said it too, but it just really restricts, it's not able to be responsive, and it's not looking long-term at the needs of the communities. It's trying to solve a short-term problem. And that's not really, this has to be sustainable. We're gonna need trans services, hopefully way longer than we're fighting off these terrible laws. This is a moment, a historical and political moment that we're living in, but the suppression of trans folks, the economic inequality that trans folks experience is not going to go away just because we get through this moment, this period. And if all the funding is being aimed at those types of problems, then how do we address the problems that were there before this ever has started and the problems that aren't going to be gone when this moment is over, So it was interesting to see that. I know I feel the same way. Even when I see those things happen, I'm like, I want to donate. I want to help. We're trying to figure out how to help people in Texas and Utah right now, but it's hard because it's only a moment, right? And this is a movement. We've got to keep this thing going.
Okay, well, you've just brought up another point. There's sort of the crisis, the moment, but there's this longer term sustained funding that organizations need. How do we generate momentum around both? So Kenya, this is a great place to bring you in because you are working on those sustained needs, the everyday needs that aren't going to go away. What are you finding? How does the report resonate? What was surprising to you, or maybe just a data point that resonated? Or did not, perhaps?
Yes, one thing that stood out for me in particular was the small sliver of a percentage that the LGBTQ community receives as a whole for charitable giving. And I think it was surprising because working in an organization that is focused on the LGBTQ community, you kind of get in this bubble and you don't realize how much you're not getting because you're just focused on your community, you're focused on the giving, you're focused on getting funds into your organization. And I look at the report and what all of these organizations and communities are doing with just the little bit that we are receiving, how much more could be done if we receive more funds, because we do such great and amazing things with this little tiny, not even 1% of funding that makes up charitable giving. So that was such a shock because there are such amazing things being done in the community and for the community. So to see that we are doing all of these things and this is all that we're getting, how much more we could do, how many more lives could be saved, because that is how Indiana Youth Group started. It was because teens were calling in the suicide hotline because they didn't have support and they were a part of the LGBTQ community. So how many more lives can we save? How many more people can we house? How many people can we help with gender affirming care if we had more of those funds? So that was shocking that it was so low, but we do so many amazing things with that little bit that we're given.
And yeah, I'm so glad you raised that point because that's a point that our team also grappled with. The low percentage, but yet the enormous innovation, resilience, and also just footprint that many of these organizations have in communities around the country. So as much as the work highlights the resource, you'd say kind of under-resourcing that's taking place, there's also another narrative that we want to emphasize, that there's so much resilience and capacity. And as you said, organizations are doing so much with so little. How can we change that picture to bring more funding? And the good news is that the trajectory does seem to be there. There's a lot of momentum around giving right now to LGBTQ plus organizations. So I can see there are lots of questions coming in and our time is not unlimited. So I want to actually go back to Kenya and ask her about the youth component. You touched on the transgender youth. We found that youth organizations were receiving the second highest share of support. And as you have worked with LGBTQ plus youth in particular, what are some of the challenges that those organizations are facing? And how can donors help support these organizations better? What should funders be aware of? And maybe it's the volunteers. What kinds of needs are emerging as you have done this work? And the data does show growing support, and it would be great to hear what you are seeing in the field as well.
So in our organization, in our communities, I'm noticing there are three major things that we need more support on and that would help. And one of those is a lack of education. And that is not only outside of the community, but even within the community. So supporting the local GSAs, and especially now in states like Indiana, they're having to get creative on how they can educate and support and give people the information that they need. I think a lot of the hate-fueled rhetoric comes from ignorance and lack of education. There have been many instances that I've spoken to people and sat down and had those conversations and gave real data and information. And you can see the light bulbs in real time cutting on in their mind, like, I had it all wrong. And just how perceptions and some old traditions are being shattered. But if people aren't getting the real information and being educated, those same ideas continue to be passed down. And that's what we're seeing happening now. And I think getting more people out there to spread facts and not opinions. And we have a wonderful GSA department here at IYG, and they go out and they're having to be creative and figure out what we're doing next year. So even that's probably going to take some additional funding and travel and different things to make that happen. But it is, I think, a very important aspect is that lack of education is what we're seeing. And another area is housing. So our housing program is primarily made up of young adults who are expelled from their home when they decided to live out openly and live their truth as being a part of the LGBTQ community. These young adults were not given a couple of months to get their affairs in order and save up money. A lot of times they were given hours to get out of their home, and they're starting with nothing. They a lot of times don't have life skills. They don't have cups. They don't have dishes. They don't have a bed. They were able to grab a few clothes. Sometimes not even that. So housing is a major factor, especially how a lot of our young people feel empowered to be themselves, which is wonderful, but sometimes their families don't feel that way. So it's wonderful to even see the young adults who come to us because they said, I would rather be homeless than live a lie. It's more important for me to live in my truth than to stay in a household where I'm not wanted. But we're seeing it more and more. Our program, we take on so many youth. We're the largest youth rapid rehousing program in Indianapolis, and I still get phone calls every day. I still get emails every day. And it's youth saying, hey, I just got kicked out. I came out and I told my mom, and now I don't have anywhere to go. We have youth where they turned 18 in high school and they were put out on the day of their birthday. Their parents were just waiting for them to turn 18 because they wanted to live in the truth of who they were. So housing is a major priority that we're seeing that we need support in. And the last one is just having safe spaces like our organization where they can just come and be themselves, be supported and be affirmed to get those life skills. Because sometimes your family might be okay with who you are, but you might not be affirmed, or it might still not feel like a safe space. So our organization makes them feel like they have somewhere to connect, that they can build community and have a safe space to be themselves, as well as all of the other life skills and support that we offer in addition to those things.
Well, thank you, Kenya. You have not just shared the work, but you've also given us kind of an agenda of how we can support you and so many other leaders around the country. So this is really a great opportunity, not just to thank you, but to also bring our own resources and our own talents to help this work forward. So let's turn to Adrian. One of the other data points from the research is that transgender specific organizations have seen the strongest growth between 2015 and 2019. So we're seeing more donors, more advocates, volunteers. From the data, we're mostly tracking the giving, but alongside that, other data points also suggest much more awareness around support for transgender specific issues. Now, as a founder and leader of a transgender organization, what are the needs that have changed perhaps in recent years? Have you seen this growth in support? I'm not sure if your organization has seen that same trend. And what are you seeing as sort of the gaps that lie ahead? Where are there opportunities? I guess similar to Kenya sharing, are there some gaps that you see, areas where donors are not necessarily supporting or funders are not necessarily aware of?
It's interesting. I really agree with Kenya in that the needs haven't changed that much from our perspective in terms of in New Mexico, right? So within New Mexico, housing has remained a huge issue. Good access to like behavioral health services. We finally just hired an in-house therapist at TGRC to do walk-in therapy with people at the drop-in center, because those are our folks least likely to have access to anything that requires you to make an appointment and stuff like that. So we're trying to really, getting those services out and housing. I mean, housing has been one of the urgent pressing needs that we've seen from the moment that we opened our center. I think the things that I've seen that have changed a little bit are that now we have more families supporting trans kiddos, even really little ones. We've always had a play group as one of our 9 support groups is a play group for trans children. And so that means the families have to come because they can't drive themselves to the play group, So the children's play group is of necessity families who love and support their trans kids. They're often the cisgender siblings with the kids. We all just play at the park and have bagels and stuff. And so more and more families are being supportive of these kids here in New Mexico. And so then we really see what a bottleneck we have around gender affirming medical care, and not just puberty blockers and then subsequently hormones, but just medical care that is gender affirming, like pediatricians who just believe these kids and listen to them and respect them and treat them as they say they are. And so we're not even talking about like transition related care necessarily as much as we're talking about transgender competent care here. And it's expanding. We've done so many trainings over the years. We're helping to expand that, but it's just never fast enough, I think, for what's needed. And that leads into the last thing I want to say about what's changed, which is we've never encountered, medical refugees and things until now. And now we have surrounding states that are passing these draconian laws. And so we have people who are coming across the border simply to see a provider, like coming on one day, going to a doctor's appointment, going back home to where they live. But we also literally have families contacting us talking about picking up their entire family and moving from one of these states to New Mexico to be in closer contact with these resources, but to be out of danger for supporting their child, so that for us feels really new and really overwhelming. You said, what are the changes and how are we dealing with the changes? Like right now, we're sort of like, how do we deal with that? Like, luckily in New Mexico, we're a big rural state and we already have to work in really close coalition with a lot of other organizations and groups. And so we're trying to just pull those coalitions together as fast as we can to see if we can find any kind of like rapid response funding for these out-of-staters and like maybe hire a single person to be a point person for the different organizations being contacted. We're trying to set up even just a little bit of infrastructure to deal with that kind of urgent and, rapidly growing need, which is horrible. I mean, yeah, that's horrible. There's no reason that we should be dealing with that.
Wow. Well, let us turn to Roger, because we've just heard some I'd say dire circumstances emerging in New Mexico. Roger, you have more than 25 years experience in the LGBTQ plus movement and lead a foundation. We've had a global pandemic, we've had a racial and social justice movement, and also an ongoing economic crisis. How have you seen funding overall change? Are you seeing some of these increases that have been highlighted in the data and specific opportunities that are emerging? This idea of collaboration came through very clearly in Adrian's work. What sorts of big picture macro trends are you starting to see?
There we go. Okay, I think I got it now. Given the amount of time that I think that I have, those are really big questions. So I'm going to zero in on a few things that really kind of, look at a bit on the data and about, kind of what it says in light of it, some of what I've seen over the many years. I will say that it does seem in the foundation world, at least, that to some degree, there is a certain amount of air quotes normalization around talking about LGBTQ issues. It is less rare than it was before. There are a few more doors that are open. I do believe, and I think that there are other reports that confirm this, that there has been a much overdue and still inadequate increase in funding for trans work, which is all very important, and at least moving in the right direction. And at the same time, I really wonder how much has really changed. I mean, for one thing, as I mentioned before, the percentage in terms of foundations, at least, doesn't actually seem to have gone up as a portion of giving, which actually means, as I said before, in a way, we are worse off, than we were previously. Secondly, if you look at the way foundation funding works in the US for LGBTQ causes, we are heavily dependent on the top 10 funders. The top 10 funders, make up more than half of the total grant making, and the top 20 make up nearly 3/4. And we love those funders, and I'm happy that Horizons is often among them, but that means that any one funder that changes their priorities and it has an outsized impact. And everybody knows that when, no matter what kind of giving you're doing, foundation giving, individual giving, you don't want to be dependent on just a handful of people. So it is a structure that while there are more foundations that are giving something to LGBTQ causes, that something is usually pretty small. Third thing is that thinking about inside of foundations, there was a report that came out just a few years ago from Funders for LGBTQ Issues, which is an association with funders who are either focused on or at least involved in funding LGBTQ causes. And it was called the Philanthropic Closet. And even I was surprised by this, but more than half, 53% of the foundation professionals surveyed who identify as LGBTQ said that they were in the closet at work. And so to me, that says that there's a lot of work to be done in the foundation world if, in fact, fully half or more than half of folks don't even feel like they can be out. And the last thing I'll say is that I've thought about this many times over the years. So we've fought and worked for more funding. What is it that stands in the way of folks in the foundation world getting it, so to speak? And there are two things that come to mind. I can prove neither, but I believe after all these years that there is truth in them. Number one is the myth of queer affluence. The belief that people in the LGBTQ community look like me and that we don't have kids and that we're all doing pretty much just fine. The reality, of course, is completely different. But the depth of that belief, which has been supported by people who oppose us because they know it will make people mad, permeates almost every part of society, foundations included. And so if you think a group is disproportionately affluent, I wish we were, but the truth is the data are very clear we are not, then why give philanthropic support to them? And the second is that I believe that while there has been some exciting progress, wonderful progress in a lot of rights and other areas, there's also this myth of inevitable progress. And that we are on like some kind of predetermined trajectory, to get to full equality and freedom. And that also, I believe, hangs in a lot of people's minds, like, y'all are going to be okay. You got marriage now, you got some medications to help take care of HIV, and there's this and that, but it'll get handled. And as we know, and I know that Kenya and Adrian can testify from the front lines, that is just not true. That is just not true. We cannot take any part of that for granted. But I think that there are a lot of people who think that, the community is going to be fine. And I think that's very damaging from a funding perspective.
Awesome. I feel like, Roger, one point you've made that I just want to lift up is that the community is diverse. There isn't one monolithic LGBTQ plus community that is affluent or well off. There's a diverse array of individuals from different income and wealth backgrounds, income and education, and we need to make sure that we educate. I think education has come up several times from all the panelists, and that has to be a point of education. I want to keep going back to this point because the data also emphasizes that when we talk about LGBTQ plus organizations, they are also very diverse in terms of the topics they work on, the areas, parts of the country, and so forth. But one question just came in that I don't want us to miss, and that is a data question. So we're going to turn it back over to the research team here, Tessa in particular. This question is more general, but it says, how does this research align or perhaps not align with other work that has been conducted? For example, the funders for LGBTQ plus organizations or issues has a report that also highlights some trends. Did we find similar in terms of insights, data insights, or are there some specific differences that we should highlight?
Yes, thanks, Una, and thanks for that question. I think this is a good opportunity to acknowledge that we are definitely not the first group of researchers to look at these issues and want to thank organizations such as Funders for LGBTQ plus issues for providing such rich data that we cite heavily in the background section of the report to provide context for our findings, and that Roger was referencing with regard to foundation giving. I would caution against making direct comparisons, of course, because you know, that research focuses on foundation giving in particular, and ours looks at total charitable giving, you know, by individuals, foundations, and corporations. I do actually think Funders for LGBTQ plus issues includes corporations. So I'd say the main difference is that individual donor component, that with that caution in place, I would say that at a very high level, and Roger did a great job on touching on some of these points, is that, you know, we have seen growth over the years in foundation and corporate giving to LGBTQ plus causes and organizations. You know, Roger made the point about how looking at foundation giving in particular, that has not necessarily kept up with overall foundation giving. Other things that Roger did a great job of highlighting was sort of those top, that concentration in foundation giving among the top funders. Our report, you know, doesn't look at that, but it's definitely something worth highlighting. And then just broadly in terms of focus area, we do see from some of the Funders for LGBTQ plus issues reports that there is a focus on you know, civil rights and advocacy, and that being sort of a key component among LGBTQ plus nonprofits, in addition to, of course, you know, direct support of communities and families and things like strengthening visibility. So I would encourage people to, you know, consider our report alongside other excellent resources that provide, you know, a more complete picture of giving to nonprofit organizations serving the LGBTQ plus community. Because while this research fills an important gap, it's not the only, you know, we are certainly not the first and the only, and tip our hats to everyone else who has sort of set the stage.
Thank you so much, Tessa. And I see that we are just about at the end of our time. So I'm going to turn it back to our panelists just to have a one second, closing remark in terms of one takeaway for this audience. What would you like them to take from this report and from our time together? I'm going to start with Roger because, as we said, he has this panoramic view from the funding landscape. What is one takeaway and perhaps one insight you'd like to leave the audience with today?
Well, okay. The one takeaway, if I had to boil it down, would be always be open to good news, but don't be misled by failing to consider the full context. And the full context here are the kinds of things that both Kenya and Adrian and every one of the whatever number thousand groups that you all found could testify to. And that while on some level resources are going up, that if you look at the whole big picture about how charitable giving has gone up and all that, it becomes a lot less exciting. And so this is a community that still needs a great deal of support and needs a lot of folks who are not kind of the so-called usual suspects. So thanks to you and to everybody else who is interested enough to tune into this.
Wonderful. Thank you. Adrian, one quick insight and takeaway that you want this audience to leave today with.
I think for me, it was really, I kept reviewing the report and looking at the resources building up to today. And I was really just kept being amazed that the report exists. And it just says to me that we're in a little bit of a different place than when I started my organization in 2007, that there now are these types of reports looking at the LGBTQ and trans funding landscape and what's going on and how we can make improvements. So I was thrilled. I think this is, a really amazing resource, and I'm so glad to see it.
Wonderful. Kenya, you are going to give us that last key insight and what this audience should take away.
I think this emphasizes the need for continued support, so we have the capacity to continue doing the amazing work that we're all doing, because this work at the very end of the day, it saves lives, and that's why it's so important. And that was my takeaway.
Thank you. And thank you for bringing us back to the mission and why we do this. I want to thank all of you for joining our research team, our panelists, and also the advisory council members and others that have joined us. It has been incredibly valuable to have all of you involved in this work and to bring these insights to light. In particular, our goal here is to bring research to the questions that all of you are working on and to advance equity for the LGBTQ plus community. I also hope that all of you who have not read the report yet will find some time to visit the LGBTQ plus index. And on the research page, you'll find not just the data, but also case studies of LGBTQ plus organizations. And finally, we want to encourage you to sign up for updates from the Equitable Giving Lab. You can enter your email address and then be part of our research community going forward. With this, I'd like to say once again, thank you for joining us. It has been such a pleasure to spend this time with you. And if you do have any follow-up questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us here at the Lilly Family School. And thank you again. Let's give a round of virtual applause to our panelists and all of us who have joined. Thank you all.